given the voluntary nature of the Paris Climate Agreement, how successful is it going to be as composed to a market-based Kyoto Protocol, which at least had some expectation from developed nations and which we are supposed to follow? In my assessment, I think the Paris Agreement might be, in fact, will be a definite flop. I might be wrong, but my assessment is flowing from this argument. One, the probability of achieving that very particular voluntary pledges has been diminished by the prospect of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected significantly the economies of nations. So, in which case, after the pandemic actually goes, nations are going to be motivated by aggressive economic drive to boost and, of course, reposition their economy to begin to do well. This will sometimes come with disregard to environmental impact of any economic activities taken, or at least most of it or some of it for some nations. So significantly, especially this will be the scenario for developing nations and poor nations who wouldn't mind the impact of non-renewable energy sources to the environment, as they have no other option. Now, which is why it's very imperative for developed nations to actually do something significant towards renewable energy source to be used in those developing or poor nations, or in fact, execute project as anticipated by the Kyoto Protocol, clean development project or project implementation that's supposed to reduce emission, you know, uh, you know, um, targets and all. So that is actually, the idea. That's the argument that I take to say that the voluntary pledge under the Paris Climate Agreement will not actually work. It will not do any good. Actually, scholars like R. Raymond Clemencon has argued that a carbon tax will be the best system since there is no much trust in the cap and trade system which form the basis of the Kyoto Protocol. Carbon tax is a way that allows nations in their capacities to tax the significant emission reducing companies or factories in their nation. Actually, an even international tax system where a set up international body tax countries based on the amount of emission the country emit, and this amount taxes paid by the country will now be used to give to nations with low emission or who barely have a significant emission, so that they will invest in renewable energy sources and cut down the use of. So, in other words, the Paris climate agreement will have limitation in the regard that its voluntary nature makes it subject to whims and caprices of states. And when you have that is one issue. That's one part of my argument actually. So the second argument is that getting states to voluntarily you know keep up with their intended national determined contribution. Remember the INDC, which is part what which forms the core of the voluntary pledges, as we discussed, as I said earlier. It's it's quite difficult to achieve in a very very uncertain world where corruption and unstable systems of government or dynamics of government system cannot be actually be held on. As you said, also as we saw in the United States, Trump pulled out of the climate agreement, as it seems that it consumes a lot for United States, and some other government will come in, another would make a different decision, another government will come in. So something is obtainable in different countries. A government will come in and say, I'm not doing anything on this Paris climate agreement. Besides, it's voluntary, so we're not doing anything. A government that is still struggling with bringing up its economy will actually turn towards using every powerful available source of economy, which is why the environmental economists propose the impact of ecological greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere to be like an inverted U-shaped. That is where a society develops or begins developing without regards to environmental impact. They use every available energy source they could, renewable and non-renewable. Then after they've developed and achieved economic maturity and become a powerful economic force, they will now begin to think of ways to reduce greenhouse gas emission and repair the damage, which of course might be true of developed nations and some developing nations. But the trick is that if we continue going by that way, that every nation will continue developing, we will not make any impact. We will kill our planet and we will risk lives, we will risk posterity. So, which is why that idea have to be thrown under the bus real quick. If we need to do anything to change the situation, it must begin now. Because by 200,100, which probably me and you might not be alive, I mean, if our posterity has to continue development we have made in this life, we have to give them an environment to do that by actually reducing the amount of greenhouse gases we emit to leave them a habitable place to stay in. Because if we render our planet uninhabitable, there is no other place we have. Climate change is a very significant threat, so it must be respected. So in that regard, the instabilities in government and the corruption and threat, that lies within government, the change of the continuum nature of government also, threatens the achievability of, the Paris